But that quickly turned in about, I would say, roughly 14 days after I gave birth to her. So I gave birth and, within those days, I was breastfeeding and whatnot, but I ended up being diagnosed with postpartum psychosis. Just to give you kind of some statistics behind that, and a lot of people confuse it with depression and anxiety. I would like to say it's all of that: depression, anxiety, OCD, all in one, plus mania.
Hi, Aubrey. I'm so excited to have you on the Amplify the Kingdom podcast. And so just share a little bit about you and the vision God's shown you.
Yeah, so I reside in Oconomowoc, Wisconsin. We're close to the Milwaukee area, but surrounded by several lakes here. That's what we love to do, is boat and paddleboard and road bike, all the fun things. But my husband and I have a daughter named Sage, and she just turned 5, actually. So it's been just a huge blessing just seeing her grow, and she's at school right now. And yeah, it's wonderful. It's wonderful. But I have had my fair share of struggles ever since having her, actually 5 years ago. So I'm sure we'll pop into that. But my biggest thing is sharing my message to those who feel like they can't have a voice or they're shameful of it for some reason. The enemy's kind of putting that on them. It's just, it is a travesty. I have, we'll get into it, where I was hospitalized and whatnot, but you just see so many people who are incredibly alone in this and alone without Jesus too. Mm-hmm. So he's been my rock during this, all several times that I've had to struggle. But besides that, family is extremely important to me. I have family close by, my husband's family that we're incredibly close with, tons of cousins for Sage to hang out with. And my family is in Illinois, so pretty close by. I have a twin sister and she's a older boy. So we love just hanging out with them. So a lot of family stuff.
I love that. So, you and I had a conversation about your story, and I believe it affects a lot of people, and a lot of people can relate to it. So tell us a little bit about your story.
It's a big one. It kind of starts with having Sage. So we were ecstatic having a baby girl, and my pregnancy went flawlessly up until birth too. I ended up having a C-section. That was kind of God's plan. Unfortunately, not my plan, but everything went very well. It was very peaceful. It was a peaceful birth. We were even playing in the OR. We were playing music with my my OB while she was giving me a C-section. Yeah. So it just was incredible. Everything that we had prayed for kind of came to fruition. But that quickly turned in about, I would say, roughly 14 days after I gave birth to her. So I gave birth and, within those days, I was breastfeeding and whatnot. But I ended up being diagnosed with postpartum psychosis. Just to give you kind of some statistics behind that, and a lot of people confuse it with depression and anxiety. I would like to say it's all of that: depression, anxiety, OCD, all in one, plus mania. So I would have dreams that were very demonic. in nature. And then I'd wake up screaming, thinking that it's realistic at that time. I was having thoughts that were not my own, which is a very scary thing because, it was just constant prayer, constant fighting with scripture, fighting for my faith, because I knew those were not my thoughts. It just was a vicious cycle. It was a 24-hour thing where you're fighting in your dreams and then you wake up and the reality is you're fighting with your brain at that time. And that continued for 6 months. And thankfully, my mother is a pharmacist, and she's been for the last 25, 30 years. So she quickly knew the implications of the antipsychotics that I was on. They work well in the beginning, but can quickly turn and your body gets used to that. So it starts to cause major anxiety attacks and issues that you shouldn't have to deal with. So we quickly were able to wean off of those antipsychotics safely. Fast forward a year after, that's when COVID hit. And my husband and I were completely rocked by, I think it was called the Delta variant at the time. We ended up getting COVID pneumonia and I went to urgent care. They didn't read my charts, unfortunately, and prescribed me to prednisone, which prednisone causes psychosis. Wow. So here I was back at it, fighting for my brain again. And this time it was very dark. It was very dark. It was in the middle of winter. I was very isolated at that time, even though there were a lot of prayers around me and a lot of support from family. This was like a spiritual battle that I've never experienced before. The enemy was after my brain at this time. So I dug into scripture at that time, and it literally was on my knees majority of the day. That's all I could do. It was like one step at a time. But thankfully, miraculously, Jesus restored that, and I was able to get off the antipsychotics once again, which I should note that is like impossible for a lot of people.
Yeah. Okay.
So I knew after that, I was like, okay, God, you're doing something with this story.
Yeah.
So then fast forward a year after, and I started obsessing over my health, like obsessing to a point where it was very unhealthy. And I would kind of explain it as idolization for sure. I'm a health person, but it got to a point where I was so fearful of getting psychosis again that I did PEMF therapy, I did ozone therapy and infrared sauna. I was taking like 20 different supplements, just trying to control my health, essentially. And God was like, no. Like, that's not the way it goes. So I think he really was teaching me something through this. So I ended up getting PEMF therapy, which is essentially, for those who don't know about it, it's very healthy for people who have autoimmune diseases. I have a Hashimoto's, a thyroid condition, and it's healthy for those who have not had mania. So it has an electromagnetic component that helps rewrite. You like sit on this pad thing in a sofa chair, essentially, and it helps rewrite some of the damaged cells in your body. But for someone who has had mania twice before, those electromagnetic fields can go straight to the brain barrier and cross over. So here I was again with the same situation. And again, just a very dark place. At this point, I was so depressed. I was very depressed. I could not get out of bed. It was hard for me to find joy in anything at this point. And I was not angry at God, but I was definitely questioning, like, okay, why? I know there's a reason, but why? Like, why me at this point? Like, I was so exhausted from the other two rounds, like physically, mentally, spiritually, all of that. I'm like, you just got to carry me. So oftentimes my prayers were very like elementary, like, Lord, please just put your hands over my brain and protect my brain. And if it's your will, restore. And he did. He did. Months later, yet again, I was able to get off of antipsychotics, which again, like third time around, I'm like, okay, this is like unbelievable.
Yeah.
Then fast forward like a year and a half, this past June, my family was my inner family. So my husband, I, and Sage, we just were kind of making do, essentially. I was in therapy, still am in therapy, but Nick was grieving completely and just could not be present a lot of the time because he was grieving in his own way. And then I was grieving in my own way. So it's like we were healing separately. And I think all that stress and trauma and being in fight or flight put me into a state of just overdrive. And I ended up being hospitalized here. There's a very amazing clinic, holistic clinic here. It's called Rogers Memorial. Excuse me. And they hospitalized me for about a week and a half. Come to find out through a psychiatrist that I believe God brought in my life, he diagnosed me with OCD, scrupulosity OCD, which is based off of religious beliefs and zeroing in on that and obsessing that. And then PTSD due to trauma. So he really was the only psychiatrist throughout the 5 years that ever listened to me. And he got down at my level and said, hey, listen, like, you're not having psychosis. This may mimic symptoms of psychosis, but this is what you have. And we're going to try a different medication. And little did he know that I was on my knees before going to the hospital there and saying to God, please, 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 please do not make me go on these antipsychotics again. Yeah. They put you into this zombie type feel. And you feel like a shell of yourself. You feel like you're looking in on somebody that you don't know. Essentially, just the side effects are absolutely horrible. Now, I should know, in order to get out of mania, you need those, but it's just, it was horrible for me. Yeah. And so he's like, we're going to try medication, but the caveat is it could cause mania. And I was like, are you kidding me? And I'm like, okay, I trust you, God, in this. And, you know, if it's supposed to be for me, let it work and let there be no issues. And sure enough, he answered my prayer. And I've been on this medication. I feel better than I felt before I was pregnant. So I just feel like myself. I feel back to myself, essentially. So that was just a huge answer to prayer. Then after this, God has really opened some doors. So I'm working with a neuro guy out of Chicago that does SPECT scans. And these SPECT scans actually, you sit in this like tubular machine and have to stand still for 15 minutes, which is pretty hard to do.
Right.
You're strapped down and they image your brain. So the images tell a story. And essentially my story is that I have brain inflammation. So the inflammation is caused by car accidents, caused by mold poisoning that I had in the past, caused by anxiety and depression. He could see those spots in my brain. Excuse me. And then the trauma of going through psychosis so many times. So we're on the track of getting to where we need to be here. And God has really placed him in my life. So it's pretty exciting.
That is, your story is so inspiring, just on so many different levels, but there are so many men and women that can relate to what you just described, that maybe they don't even know what this is, but they just feel all this anxiety and stress. And so